Britt. I'm in Columbus, Ohio. I know that I told everyone a couple weeks ago that I was going to be spending some time getting ready to start going over the manuscript of my story. Since then, I've been doing a lot of tutorial videos, um, purchasing lighting, microphone, a desk, just to get my space and everything that I need in order to put this story onto social media and to share with everyone. So, the first thing I'm going to tell you is the name of the title that I've come up with for this book, and it's Entering the Whale's Belly at the Border. Now, the reason I chose that, or I felt guided to use that title, there's a biblical story about a man named Jonah. And God sent this big fish, supposedly it was a whale, and he swallowed Jonah. The whale swallowed Jonah into his belly to keep so that God could keep him from drowning. And metaphorically, I feel like this is what this whole story was about. God sent a whale to swallow me at the border, and the only difference is Jonah was in that belly for 3 days, and I was in that belly for over 3 years, almost 4. And so that's the difference. But to me, it's just parallel to my journey. So on February 19th, 2020, I was in the passenger side of a friend at the time's small SUV, and we were approaching the border of Mexico and California in Tijuana. I felt this nervousness in my stomach, in my gut, but I also was observing the poverty and feeling sad for having to leave and not being able to help the Mexican people more. And I just started bracing myself for what I felt like was the unknown about what was going to happen to me, even though I didn't know what was going to happen to me. But there was just this fear of not having my FMM, which was a tourist card that you need to get when you're going to be in Mexico for more than 2 weeks. And we had entered Mexico January the 9th. But we couldn't find out where to get the card. So we just spent 6 weeks there without one. And so that's where I thought my nervousness was coming from. When we get to this guard booth, what's he going to say? So when we got less than 20 minutes from the guard booth, we just started trying to come up with a believable story about why we didn't have an FFM. And we tried to rehearse it, that we had just driven down and spent a night in Ensenada. And I remember telling my friend to look around. Look in this car. All my shit was in the car. All my clothes, my laptop, everything. Toiletries. I did not have a home. And so I just didn't think that would be believable. So then my attention focuses back on this man. He's trying to sell a pair of shoes and a crucifix at the border. And you just see these numerous Mexicans just trying to sell different things as you're leaving out. And his clothes were torn and his feet were so swollen that he was having to walk on the right side of his foot. And, I started feeling this pain. And I noticed I had some change in pesos on the dash, and I had just had this thought, we're not going to use it anymore. So I motioned for him to come over to the car, and he held his hand out, and I placed the change in his hand, and then just gave his hand a soft rub and a smile, and I said a blessing. And then I asked myself, why had I forgotten the importance of being a vessel of healing for the sick and the poor? I just kept thinking about that, because like the Jonah story, I had become so disconnected from God, and I was just drowning. the night before that we left, I stood out on the beach and I just prayed and prayed and prayed for God to please help me forgive and find a way to reconnect with Him. I mean, that was my prayer. And so, you hear, be careful what you pray for, because, if you're asking for something, then I feel like God's just going to make a way, whatever that looks like. And Mexico had filled me with so much humility and love. And I really recognized that when I got to the border and was just observing everything I was leaving. So we approached the border, and I pulled my passport out of the protective sleeve, and I handed it across my friend. And this big masculine guard with aviator glasses and just a very intimidating stare took the passport, asked where we had been, and she told him, Ensenada for a night. And then he was scanning the passports, and he asked, well, did you buy any souvenirs? And I just tried to be funny. I said, well, I had some pina coladas. No smile, no laugh. And he said, I'm going to need y'all to pull over into secondary. And in that moment, I knew something was off. It was the same feeling I had 3 months prior, after receiving a call from Eric, my son's father, about an investigator who had come by his house and was accusing me of stealing guns that were in Eric's possession. They were guns that belonged to my son, and he had them. And so, and then later that same evening on that day, that investigator called me and told me that there was just a large amount of money that was missing from my grandmother's account. And I mean, we had joint accounts. So this was just a false accusation that had come from Nikki, which was a woman I'd spent 3 years with. And I had left her because of all the mental abuse. And she took that and called my grandmother, who had dementia, and told her I'd been stealing. So the police were involved more than what I'd even imagined. So when we pull over into secondary, we're sitting there. My heart's really racing. I'm getting my phone. I'm deleting pictures, text messages, anything that may show that we had been there since the 1st of January. And this big officer came over to my window, and there were probably about 6 other ones that were just walking around the car, and they had been doing so for about 30 minutes. And he looks at me and he said, "Are you Brittany Weeks?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "I need you to step out of the car." And he said, "I need you to turn around. Place your hands on the window. Do you have anything in your pockets that'll stab, stick, or hurt me?" And I said, "No, sir. Just my cell phone." And he took it, and he started putting my hands behind my back and cuffing me. And I said, What is this?" And he said, "It's cuffs, let's go." And he would ask me one question, and before I could give him an answer, I was being asked another question by another officer. And they took me into Border Patrol and started patting me down, and was putting the personal belongings that I had on me inside of a tray. Well, I was freaking out. I didn't know what I had done. And another officer behind the desk said, "Is this your whiskey pop?" And that was code for your warrant processing. And I didn't know that at the time. I learned that later. And so they walked me over to a steel bench and cuffed my ankle to the bench and told me to sit down. An agent would be down to speak with me soon. So I waited, and an agent came down, and he said, "Are you Brittany Weeks?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, you're being arrested. You have a fraud warrant in Georgia. Now here's what's going to happen. We're going to transfer you to Las Colinas Women's Detention Center in San Diego, and we're kind of backed up. You could be here another 4, 5, 6 hours." And I said, "Can I please make a phone call?" He said, "Sure, where's your phone?" I said, "I have no idea." So they sent the officer back out to my friend's SUV and got the phone, brought it back to me, and I called my dad, and he answered. And I said, "Dad, um, I'm being arrested at the border." And he just started